Hey everyone, I am back for my little bit of maternity leave where I wasn't filming because I had our second baby boy, cute little baby Henry here, who is joining me for this video. We're gonna do a Q&A as well as a birth story. I opened up a question box on Instagram and asked you guys what questions you had. So I'm going to incorporate those questions into kind of walking through the birth story of welcoming little baby Henry. I have notes in front of me. I have written down my whole birth story so I don't forget things. And then I also have your questions in front of me, so I might look around at those things. But starting off, the first question that I got was whether I went into labor on my own or if I was induced. With our first, Owen, who is now just over 2 years, he was an induction. I was 40 and 5 days. And I was really resistive to an induction. It actually went pretty well. I wanted to say very well, but it went pretty well. He ended up having the cord wrapped around his neck twice. So a lot of times when they would up the Pitocin or I would change positions, his heart rate would drop, which was really scary. But beyond that, it was a pretty seamless process, a great labor and delivery. It was a long labor. It was about 24 hours. And my biggest fear with having an induction is I had heard or thought, maybe this is actually true, that the chances of having a C-section are higher when you go the induction route, especially if your body isn't quite ready to deliver and give birth. But again, things did go really well with our first. So with our second, I brought up the topic of induction this time around. It wasn't something that was pushed by my doctor. I know a lot of people have thoughts on inductions either way, especially elective inductions, especially elective inductions when they're around the holidays, because a lot of times I know people feel like doctors push inductions for their convenience, and with us having a due date really close to the end of the year, really close to Christmas, and a bunch of events like that, it could have been easy for my doctor to push it. She gave me the option of having an induction as early as 39 weeks, and I felt like I didn't want to have it that early. So I pushed it out further, and we did end up having an induction right before 40 weeks. So my body clearly wants to keep babies in there. I have no idea how long I would have gone the first time if I didn't have an induction, or how long it would have taken for Henry if I didn't have an induction. There were numerous factors that went into the decision of having an induction, kind of personal to us. It was a little bit easier to have a scheduled date. Of course, I could have gone into labor before the scheduled date, but just having childcare set up for our older one, Owen, and knowing a little bit more, having more certainty, being able to tell his daycare when he was going to be out because he stayed with my in-laws while we were in the hospital. All of those logistics were just a little bit easier with an induction. And I was a little bit worried that it was going to be similar to how it was with Owen. So with Owen, they told me that I was going to have a 7 a.m. induction to come in like at 6:30 or 6 or something like that. And they called me at 5 a.m. that morning and said, hey, we don't have any beds available. Just stay by your phone and we'll give you a call when we're ready for you. I kept calling them every 3 to 4 hours throughout the day, and there was no space for us. At around, I want to say 9:30, 10 o'clock, I called them one more time and said, okay, can I assume that I'm not going into the hospital today and having a baby? It's too late at night and I can just go to bed. They said, keep your phone on ring. It theoretically could happen in the middle of the night that we have some space open up, and then we would have you come into the hospital when we call you. So I brushed my teeth, I got my pajamas on, got into bed, and of course, like the second I crawled into bed, they called me and said, come on in. So we started an induction with our first, with Owen, really late at night. This time around, they originally said the same thing, induction at 7 a.m. But I got a phone call the day before saying, don't come in at 6:30 or whatever the time was. We'll give you a call when we are ready for you. So I went to bed that night. I didn't turn my phone on ring. We're usually up really early with Owen because he gets up so early, but for some reason he slept in that morning. They had called me at 6:15 and I completely missed the call, and they were telling me to come in to be induced. I wrote it down. I woke up and called them back by 7, and we were at the hospital before 8 o'clock in the morning. So even though I missed their call, I was still at the hospital within an hour and 45 minutes of when they originally called. And I feel like that's pretty good timing. We got ourselves together very, very quickly. Jim dropped me off at the hospital because we still had to take Owen to school that day. And then my in-laws picked him up from school at the end of the day. So he dropped me off at the hospital, then Owen off at school, and came back to be with me. And while he was doing all of that, they got me started very, very quickly. My doctor happened to be there, so she dropped in. They did the balloon. I think it's a Foley balloon, I want to say. I did that with my first induction as well. It is, in my opinion, very uncomfortable, kind of painful. I do not enjoy that part, but basically it helps you dilate to 4 to 5 centimeters, and then they're able to pull it out. And once they can remove it by pulling on it, it means that your cervix is 4 to 5 centimeters dilated, because if it's not dilated that much, you can't pull the balloon out. They paired that with starting some Pitocin. So I started to have some contractions. Some of them I wasn't really feeling, other ones I was feeling, but they weren't painful necessarily. They were maybe just kind of uncomfortable. By the time Jim was there, I was still not in pain. I was in active labor, you would say. So I wanted to do what I did with Owen, which was move around as much as possible, because part of my birth plan was having an epidural. So I wanted to keep moving before I got to that stage. So when Jim got there, we took some laps around the hospital. Again, wasn't in that much pain. I wasn't moving very quickly because that balloon is really uncomfortable. So I did those laps. We got back into our hospital room, and I'm looking at my notes here, and by 12:30 the balloon was pulled out, so that means I was about 4 to 5 centimeters. Oddly, after they did that, the contractions started to space out a little bit more. They were less painful than they were before, because the amount of pain that I was in was building up a little bit. It wasn't terrible or anything like that, but they lessened in terms of pain, duration, and time apart between the contractions. So they decided to up my Pitocin and break my water. After they broke my water, then the pain did increase again. And our nurse said she wanted to wait about 2 hours before an epidural at least, and wait a little bit before checking me again after that balloon was removed and I was at that 4 to 5 centimeter mark. So we decided to go walk around again, and I was in so much pain. Those contractions got painful real fast. And I will give Jim full credit here, my husband. He was the best advocate for me ever. He was like, Sophie, you're not trying to be a hero here. You want an epidural. Let's get one, because it takes about an hour after you say you want one to actually receive it. You have to go through a bag of IV fluids, which takes about 45 minutes or so. And then they also have to call the anesthesiologist and get it all set up. So maybe 45 minutes to an hour after you request one. I was trying to hold out, and I just, again, was of the belief that sometimes when you get an epidural, it can stall things out. So I wanted to move around as much as possible before the epidural. I was just in a lot of pain. So we decided to head back to the room, press the call button, get our nurse in there, and say, I think we should start to have the conversation of having an epidural sooner rather than later. That was about 3 o'clock. She said it should take about 40 minutes. It took a whole lot longer, and my contractions just got so much worse. I was in a lot of pain. The first anesthesiologist that she contacted just didn't respond to her page. There was a second one, and she said we could probably contact him if the first one doesn't respond in the next however long. And I was like, can we just contact the second person now and get this thing moving? Because I'm gonna look at my notes again. It was about 4:30, so it had been an hour and a half by the time we got the anesthesiologist to come give me the epidural. And after that, I was completely pain-free, much more relaxed, and very glad that I had a husband that was looking out for me and my best interests, because honestly, wait for this next part of the story. At the time of the epidural, I was at 6 centimeters. After the epidural, I will say my blood pressure did get really low, so they had to give me a dose of medication for that twice. The first time it didn't really help. The second time it still didn't help a ton, but they were monitoring it. One of the questions that I have from Instagram was, somebody said, was I afraid of dying with birth? And that is one of their fears of giving birth. I will say, I was so much more confident going into my second labor and delivery after my first. I honestly wasn't fearful, I would say. I can never fully rest easy until there is a healthy baby in my arms, just because there's so many things that can go wrong that maybe they don't see on ultrasound or go wrong during labor and delivery. But I knew I had a great care team, a great hospital, really, really great OB. I liked my nurse a lot, so I felt confident that if something went wrong, that I was in the best place possible for them to take care of me. Like I said, more confident going into this birth, almost just excited to get the process going. So no, I was not afraid of dying, but I completely understand all of the fears that are associated with labor and delivery because there are so many things that can happen and so many unknowns. So totally valid if you're feeling that way or feeling nervous about your baby and anything else that goes along with it. But back to the labor and delivery story a little bit, my OB stopped by and she wanted me to use the peanut ball. So they had me lay on one side with this, it's almost like a squished yoga ball in the shape of a peanut that's in its casing, and lay on one side with it between my legs, and then they had me flip to the other side. By the time they flipped me to the other side, I was feeling so much pressure lower down in my booty. I said to the nurse, I feel like I pooped on the bed. I just felt that pressure, and I know that a lot of times women feel like they're going to have a bowel movement when they're going to deliver their babies, but I felt like I already had. The pressure was so intense. I was just convinced. I told her, somebody check on the other side of me, tell me what's going on over there. And my nurse wasn't fully convinced because, again, I had just been at 6 centimeters and you're trying to get to 10 centimeters. And by the time you feel that pressure, you're usually at 10 and the baby's really pushing down and it's time for you to push. I insisted that she check me one more time, and it had been 45 minutes since I was a 6 and since I got the epidural, and I was at a 10 and the baby was right there and we were ready to go. They quickly got everything together. They were clearly not expecting me to progress that fast. The little table that they have all set up, the cart for when the baby is going to be delivered, wasn't quite ready. My OB wasn't there. There wasn't a baby nurse there ready for us. So we had to contact all those people, call those people. And in the process, I, again, was feeling that crazy pressure, felt like I needed to push. My nurse asked me if I wanted to do some practice pushes, which I declined because I felt like if I did one single practice push, a baby was gonna come out of me immediately, and I wanted to make sure that my OB was there when a baby came out of me. So I decided just to kind of hold on and wait. When she got there, it was so funny because she was like, okay, you're at a 10, next contraction, let's get to pushing, it's time. I just didn't have a contraction for kind of a long time. My contractions had been so consistent, and then she shows up and we're sitting there kind of twiddling our thumbs waiting for another contraction, but finally came around and she said it was time to push. Jim timed it because he was curious, and he said it was just under 6 minutes of pushing before Henry arrived. With Owen, somebody else's question was, how this birth was different from my first birth, and I've kind of mentioned what went on with Owen, but with Owen it was about 35 minutes, which again is really fast for a first baby, but 6 minutes was great in my book. The first thing they said was, wow, this baby has a lot of hair. And I'm sure you can see by his hair here, he sure does have a lot of hair. They brought him immediately to my chest. It was just one of those magical moments. If you have kids, you know that feeling of meeting your child for the first time. It's just really special. Jim and I looked at each other. We're really just in awe of this beautiful baby boy that we created and how sweet he was. So they had him on my chest. He cried pretty quickly. They got all the mucus out of him and they let him sit on my chest for a while. And then they finally got around to checking his temperature. Unfortunately, his temperature was very low. And another part of my birth plan was that I really wanted to have that golden hour where the baby sits on the mother's chest uninterrupted for an hour. Any testing that they need to do, they can usually do while the baby is on your chest, especially if you're somebody who's interested in breastfeeding, which I did with my first and am doing with Henry here. It's a great way to help establish that initial bonding, even if you're not doing that. Again, really great to have that skin to skin time uninterrupted for as long as you can. But because his temperature was low, they had to take him under the warmer and pull him away. So I felt like I was robbed a little bit of that full golden hour. But Jim was really sweet. After he warmed up a bit, they brought him back to me. And then after I kind of had that bonding time, then Jim was able to hold him. And he did so great. We had a nice stay in the hospital. We stayed there that evening, one more evening, and then left the next morning. And things have been going pretty well so far with him. Some of the other questions that you all asked were more so related to how things are going now that we're home. So I'll go through a few of those questions. You know, somebody asked how life is with 2 kids and how Owen is doing with his new brother. I will say that has been tricky. I did film another video on how we prepared our older child for a new sibling, and I think a lot of it did help. So he was fully aware of the fact that we were bringing a new baby home. He's just been struggling with the transition, as I think a lot of little kids do. But I will say he loves baby Henry. He always wants to know where the baby is. He says, "See baby Henry, see baby Henry." So he wants to check out where he is at all times. He gives him kisses. He rubs his back. He tries to give him a pacifier. So in that sense, the transition's going really great. He's been really gentle with him. We haven't had any accidents like that, but I can tell that he's just going through a transitional phase with sharing time with mom and dad, which I think is completely normal. If you have tips on that transition, let me know. But overall, things are going really great. Somebody asked if I'm going to do a nanny again this time because Owen did have a nanny at home. I work from home, so it was great to have him at home with me. We did the first 18 months with a nanny, and then he transitioned to daycare. We love his daycare, and they do have an opening for Henry. So I'm going to send Henry to daycare right away after my maternity leave, which is 14 weeks. I know that's going to be a really hard transition for me because 14 weeks seems so early to just leave a little baby for the full day, but unfortunately I do have to work and still work at this point. So I am going to send him to be at the same daycare as Owen and feel really confident in the daycare that we have, and especially was really impressed with how they handle infants and have toured their newborn facility and all of that. So I feel like he is in the best place possible other than with me at home or with a nanny at home with me there. There was a question about my maternity leave. Like I mentioned, I get 14 weeks. If I had a C-section, I would have gotten 16 weeks. Much better than my last job where I got 12 unpaid weeks. It was just FMLA, which if you're not familiar, it's the Family Medical Leave Act. And it basically says they can't fire you for having a baby. They will hold your job for you for 12 weeks. They don't have to pay you, but you can apply for short-term disability and get a percentage of your pay. This time, benefits are so much better and have a really, really supportive company of me having a baby and that bonding time. Jim was another question, how long is his leave? He's back to work already. He took about a week. It did help that some of those were days off because they were holiday days anyway, so he didn't have to miss as much work. But the way that his job works, it's more detrimental to him if he misses work, and work doesn't really stop if he takes time off. So he did some work from home days, and he has a really flexible job. So if I do need him or we have doctor's appointments, he joins me in the middle of the day. He'll stop home during lunch and all of that. But I will say, the days when I am home alone with Henry are pretty easy. I not only felt that confidence boost with second time labor and delivery, but I feel a confidence boost so much more with a second child and just being a mom for a second time. Maternity leave with Owen was just a little bit more stressful because everything was new, but this time around I know what to expect. Another question was the difference between Owen and Henry and their temperaments and sleeping. I think he's just an easier baby. Sleep-wise during the day, he just sleeps a ton. At night, we're still kind of doing, originally it was more like every hour and a half to 2.5 hours he would wake up. Now he's getting some good 3-hour stretches, and it's just building and building. For the most part, he only cries when he is hungry, has to poop or has gas or has spit up or a burp. Other than that, he's been an awesome, very, very easy baby. And because I had one that was on the other end of that scale, I do know the difference. So if you feel like you have a newborn and things are really difficult, know that it's not you. It could just be the temperament of your baby. And a lot of times it is really difficult to take care of a newborn. But I just will say that the second time around, I'm finding this a lot easier. The hard part is when Owen comes home and there's 2 kids now, and if Jim has to go do something and I'm trying to watch both kids. I completely anticipated this, but if I'm trying to feed Henry and Owen wants me to go over there and play with him, that part by far is the most difficult. Another question I got was, what is my least favorite part about having a newborn? Beyond the sleepless nights, because those are difficult, but I am somebody who does pretty well without a ton of sleep, so that's not terrible for me. Granted, I would prefer to sleep the full night through than get up every couple of hours. I guess that's one of them. I also, this is so random, the umbilical cord, when you first have a newborn, they have like a little umbilical stump, it's called. You want to be really careful of it. Newborn diapers dip down a little bit so that it doesn't irritate it. And I'm clearly not a medical person. It just grosses me out and I get almost like the heebie-jeebies and I'm so nervous that it's gonna snag on something or just like don't like dealing with it. So weirdly, the umbilical stump is something that stresses me out to no end. So once it falls off, it is a huge relief for me. So Henry's already fell off and I just felt instantly better every time I do diaper changes. There's a lot of laundry with a newborn, but the second I brought Henry home, the second I met him, I was just flooded with the reminder of how precious and special this time is to have a newborn. And maybe I am appreciating it even more after having Owen and watching him grow up so quickly, how finite this time is and how they're little for such a short period of time. I'm honestly really soaking it in and there's not a lot that I dislike about it. The last comment or question was asking how I personally am doing and said to please rest. I'm doing great. Hopefully you got that through this video, that labor and delivery overall was pretty good. I am enjoying these days, just kind of slowly getting back into my small business of sophisticated organization and sophisticated motherhood. I padded in a lot of things ahead of time before I had Henry, so I truly am easing into it. And if you know me at all, you know that I thrive on having things to do and keeping myself busy. So if I wasn't doing that type of stuff for 14 weeks of maternity leave, I might drive myself crazy. So I think I'm trying to find that perfect balance of just hanging out and cuddling, just the 2 of us. I mean, how cute is this? He's holding my little sweatshirt here and we're just cuddling and snuggling up. I do a lot of contact naps with him sitting here and we'll do some computer work while I hold him. But again, with that balance, I also let him do some naps on his own so he learns that skill while I get things done around the house. But overall, things are going so great. I appreciate all of the comments and well wishes and congratulations on the arrival of Henry. There will be many more updates to come. If you have any specific videos or content that you want from me while we are with our newborn here, newborn related things, let me know in the comments below. I would be happy to film something that would be a video that you would love to watch. So with that, I am going to keep snuggling Henry, and I want to thank you for joining me today as together we make this motherhood journey sophisticated.